Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Home Tech Podcast. Jason Griffin here, so happy to have you with us. I am joined, as always, by my partner Seth Johnson. Seth, how's it going?
Good man. Did you see the sun this week? I think there was something big that happened.
There was the eclipse this week, and it was awesome. Yeah, we did some of the little pinhole boxes. You seen those online?
Yeah, the cereal box thing with the aluminum foil.
Yeah. We failed to acquire any eclipse glasses in time, and they were going for crazy prices on Amazon. I don't know if you looked, but they were like a bunch of them I saw were like $80 or $100 a pair. It was nuts. I didn't spend a lot of time looking, so we did a couple of those little pinhole boxes, and they actually worked great. It's my first time doing that, and we had a lot of fun with it. It was really cool.
Yeah, we scored some glasses from 7-Eleven. Believe it or not, had a bunch. And I had heard they did, but it was a couple of weeks ago. So I scored a little bit more. I bought like what I thought was 4 pair for, myself and family and that kind of thing. And it turns out there were 2 in every packet. So I was like flush in all these glasses, and everybody's freaking out because they have no glasses. I'm like, I don't know what to do with these. I mean, I should have gotten on eBay and done express shipping, but a little silly. But yeah, man, it was a great. We were 87 here. I think you said you were 92 there.
92% here in Denver. Yep.
I wish the sun was that every day here, because man, it was nice out when that eclipse hit.
Yeah,
the sun was just it was really nice.
Yeah, really temperature dropped dramatically. It definitely daylight. Very much daylight, at 92%, nothing even close to what it was like. I actually had some family go up to Idaho to be in the path of totality, and I saw some videos that they took during the total, blackout there or whatever, and it was amazing. Like the difference between 92 and 100% is huge. In fact, literally night and day, right?
Yeah, well, there's a full range of light as we come to know it, from dark to very, very bright. And how we represent that on a video screen is something of a challenge. And I think
nice.
I think we got the guest on tonight to cover that for us and explain what all of these crazy things around HDR, or high dynamic range, and 4K and 8K, and I wrote a bunch of these down. Nits. You ever heard of nits, Jason? We've got nits coming out all over the place here. SMPTE, 18 gig, HDR, CAT-X, SDR, all this stuff we covered tonight.
Alphabet soup.
I've got about 18 more of those to go. So this stuff, we had Jack MacDougall on from PixelGen. We've had him on the show before at CEDIA last year. He was in, I think, like the Innovation Alley, way back in the corner. And I ran across this product and thought it was great. So all these video questions have been coming up, and in the back of my mind, Jack's been the guy to talk to. And I think that after the conversation tonight, I don't know if I'm even more confused or less confused, but at least I think I know more about what crazy video formats are out there and what they kind of mean. I think I got a better handle on that.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Jack, I think does a really good job, better than I think just about anyone I can think of bringing these concepts, down to earth a little bit. Some of it gets pretty technical, and you'll see that in the interview, of course. But making those concepts relatable and trying to figure out exactly how that impacts you, either as an enthusiast, consumer, or perhaps, of course, professional out there installing this stuff. It was a really, really good interview. So PixelGen, again, is the company. Jack MacDougall is who we had on, and be sure to stay tuned for that. As we normally do, we're going to share a number of news stories before we get into our interview. Before we do that, we want to extend a big thank you, as we always do, to our patrons, supporters of the Home Tech Podcast here. If you're interested in learning how you can support our efforts here on the podcast, head over to HomeTech.fm/support. Once again, that's HomeTech.fm/support, and that is where you can contribute to our efforts here for as little as $1 a month. We've got a bunch of people doing that. We really, really appreciate it. And I always like to mention that even at that $1 level, we'll send you an invite to our private Slack channel, The Hub, which is a really great community. A lot of dialogue constantly going on there, and really, really enjoy that community. So one last time, HomeTech.fm/support.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to echo that thank you, and also thank everyone. It looks like only Europeans joining us tonight in the HomeTech Live.
That's right.
Which is kind of crazy because they're up like super late. I think this is +5, so yeah, it's probably already tomorrow over there. I'm glad that everybody is able to get over and join us in the chat room and heckle us from afar. And in this case, very, very far. We've got Bruno and Chris Gamble over there in the chat room chatting with us right now. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's jump in. We've got a lot of ground to cover here. Pick of the week, Seth. You found another good one. This looks like it came from a Reddit post. I found a new way to mount my Echo Dot, and we will include a link to this in our show notes at HomeTech.fm/176 if you're interested in seeing this. I'm trying to figure out exactly how this works because what he's got is an Echo Dot somehow affixed inside of a recessed ceiling can, inlight ceiling can. So I'm not sure exactly how that works, how it's getting power, how it's mounted, but pretty funny nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. This is it works, I guess. I mean, I can see the little green light up there when they've said the code word. I can't imagine it's I don't know. I don't think I'd get away with this in my house. But there it is. It's in the ceiling. A ceiling mounted Echo.
Right. And somebody in this Reddit post makes a good point too, which is a problem we talk about with the smart light bulbs, right? Like what happens if you turn the light switch off?
I forgot about that, but yeah, you wouldn't be able to act. You'd have to leave your lights on all the time. So yeah.
Anyways,
funny stuff.
Pretty funny. I do think there's a hole in the market right now in the custom channel to potentially figure out these sort of hidden microphone solutions. I think we've talked briefly about that on the show. That is the one trade-off, right? In a high-end home, these Echoes and Echo Dots don't always fit in. So you see stuff like this, which is I always get a laugh out of.
I saw one the other day. It was pretty cool. It was for an Echo Dot specifically. It was like a little round disc that you kind of put it in and then wind the cord up behind it, and then the plug like affixes through it so that the dot kind of hangs down below the plug it would plug in. So the dot's actually on the wall underneath the plug when you plug it in. Like it would get it off your kitchen counter.
Right.
I'll have to look that up.
Step in the right direction.
Yeah. It would still work, it still should work. So I thought that wasn't bad. This, I don't know if I can get behind this one.
Yeah.
It's a little bit
that
far
might be a
there.
tough sell.
Yep.
All right. Well, moving on here, we want to touch on a follow-up from our episode last week, episode 175. If you listened to that episode, you heard us talk about a recent issue with a company called LockState, where they released an over-the-air firmware update that unfortunately bricked a particular model of their smart locks. And of course, we won't dive in and rehash that whole story. But Nate Schneider, who is actually a friend of mine, and some of our listeners, I should say, will recognize that name. Nate and I launched the AV Shop Talk podcast together a few years ago. I have since stepped away from that, but Nate has carried the torch, and it's a great show. Again, AV Shop Talk. If you're a fan of our show and you haven't checked that out, definitely go take a look at it. But Nate was listening to our show, and I know Nate listens every week, and Nate, we appreciate that. Literally had to pull over his car and record a video, sort of a video follow-up to our conversation about LockState. Now, quick bit of context, during that conversation, Seth, you and I talked about how, unfortunately, when you buy connected home products, what you're doing is you're putting a little computer into a device, in this case, a lock. And as we all know, computers are prone to crashes and failures, and potentially serious ones at often the most inopportune time. And our point that we were talking about was that it's one of the inherent risks of going with a smart home, is that you are exposing yourself to these sort of risks. Well, Nate sort of took issue with that and recorded a post explaining that. We won't include the whole thing. We'll definitely include a link to it in the show notes. Again, HomeTech.fm/176, and would encourage you to go check that out. I think he made some valid points, but of course, some things that we want to follow up with that as well.
Yeah, I've got some notes. So yeah, I'm not going to play the video. I think you should definitely go check it out. And I think Nate's got some pretty good points, and he's definitely animated and passionate about them. I don't agree with one of his major points, and that is that we can't let this happen. I don't agree with maybe the premise behind that. It's okay. So I guess you kind of have to take a step back because maybe I'm projecting this on him, and maybe I'm not. But I saw a lot of this covered in conjunction with that story about OT updates, over the air updates happening without a dealer involvement or an end user pushing a button or that kind of thing. Like this update was kind of pushed out for whatever reason. It could have been a security reason. It could have been, a feature that they were adding in. But this feature was pushed out over the air, and they call that an OTA update. I think if you look over the entirety of these things that we're calling Internet of Things devices that are out there right now, if you look over the entire history of those, I think you'll find that the OTA updates have already proven themselves, and they'll be more reliable in this. They make the end user's product more reliable and secure. One example I can think of, there was a Ring security issue that came up, and within a few days, all of the Ring devices that were online were patched. I mean, that's pretty cool, where they could go out and they can just like push a button and fix the problem. And the same thing happens when you attach the Ring to the internet. Like the first thing it does is it goes out and gets the update off their server and brings it down. Like that's awesome. That's really how it should work. That could still go bad. But contrast that with how the on-site update devices like Dahua, Access cameras, where you continually have problems for not only those devices, but the rest of the internet, because they can easily be hacked and difficult to update. So I think that's kind of like a separate conversation. I might be projecting that on Nate a little bit. Like I think he was okay with the OTA updates, but I think he was just saying this can't happen where the OTA updates are bad. And that's where, we were kind of playing around with it. I was kind of saying, it's not that big of a deal because, these things happen. These are new devices. Computers are being put in. And you know what? I'm going to stick by that. I think the devices aren't perfect and never will be because they're made by people, and people make mistakes. I make mistakes. I'm big at making mistakes, but the thing is, making those mistakes is a learning moment, and you learn from those mistakes. You learn from how to fix them. And I think the problem is actually if those mistakes aren't corrected in a timely manner or in a professional way. And if you go back and look at what Lock State, I think is the company, what they were doing in the wake of all these mistakes that they made with this one particular product line with a subset of the ones that were being updated, I think they had a proper process in place to deal with those issues when they came up. And if it happens again to Lock State, if they wipe out another set of locks in the future for some reason, I think then we can say, hey, this company is a problem. This can't happen. But this was one company, one bad firmware update for one particular lock. It may have affected, I think they said somewhere 500 locks or something like that. But the company proactively sent out an email, said, here's what we can do. Here's the time frame. Like time frames, like that's awesome. On how long this is going to take to turn around. I think they did everything they could, and I don't expect these smart products to be perfect. They just simply can't be because they were made by humans. If smart machines start making smart products, then we might be all right.
Might be in for a change.
Yeah, we might be in for a change on how society works in general.
Yeah,
if machines are making things. So, I think we've got some more growing pains to go through this stuff. Where this company did everything right. They're doing OTA updates. That they're patching security vulnerabilities. They're introducing new features. And when a problem does happen, they send out a letter proactively to their end user saying, "Hey, we've got this." Covered. Here's how you can get it fixed. Boom, boom, boom. And they're standing behind their product. If they had walked away, I'd say it's a problem. But this, I don't know. I guess last week I was a little more lighthearted because they actually did what it took to correct the problem. And I think Wink did. The example I gave about Wink, they did it too. They went above and beyond, not above and beyond, but they did what it took to update their product. And I think went out of, in bankruptcy for it, right? I mean, they had financial problems later on because they made a huge mistake early on and bricked a bunch of their devices. So while I understand Nate's point, I don't agree with that particular point at all. So I hope that's good for follow-up. Nate's had his rant. I think I had my rant. Definitely go over there and watch his. His is pretty good.
Go check it out. He makes some good points. And I think his, the overriding sentiment is just that we shouldn't be dismissive of the human effect of these things, which clearly I don't think was our intention in that conversation, but it was more to say, hey, buyer beware, right? Like when you go into buying a smart home device, you're buying a very sophisticated device that was engineered to cost very little. Most of these devices, when you look at what functionality like that would have cost you a handful of years ago, are being engineered very affordably, and there are trade-offs that come with all of this. So go check that out. I can't really add anything that you didn't already say. I think there are valid points on both sides. I thought Nate had some great points, so go check that out. And I think probably the most important thing you said there, Seth, is hopefully the company learns from it, and if they make that same mistake again, then it's a very different conversation at that point. But let's move on here. We've got a story related to Sonos, a couple of Sonos stories here, actually, and it looks like they are hitting at a privacy policy that would basically require users to accept it, or their devices will cease to function. So catchy headline there. So unpacking that a little bit, they've confirmed that existing customers, we're reading from zdnet.com here, will not be given an option to opt out of the new privacy policy. So we've talked about these sort of stories before, and it is interesting, sort of the implications of that, right?
Yeah, so this kind of follows up, I guess, nicely with the previous conversation about OTA updates. Like, this is an over-the-air update that adds in functionality and features, and if you don't agree to the legal mumbo jumbo that comes along with it, your product stops working. Kind of like night and day. I'm not sure how consumers are going to react with this. I think most of them are going to say, okay.
Yeah, not even think twice, right?
Yep. Who reads those things? No one. No one reads those things. That's who. I hit okay, and I want my Sonos to work.
Music.
So
right, exactly.
Yep, exactly. So I don't think they're going to have any problems. They may get kind of some of these people online complaining a little bit early on, but I don't really think that. I think more people are going to be excited about the integration with the Amazon Echo or functionality than they're just going to say, okay, done, and hit the update button, and it's going to go through.
Yeah. I think the the fact that they're sort of forcing their users to accept this points to maybe a significant change, right? That would be consistent with the rumors that we're hearing about upcoming voice control. We've been hearing a lot about Sonos and Alexa. And go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it's more than just rumors. They've confirmed it. I think they demoed it like a couple months back, and people said, "Oh, this is awesome."
Yeah, rumors isn't not the best word, but
like,
just rumblings, it's coming, and it's coming.
It's evidently coming soon. Like if they're pushing out the legal stuff now, there's reports that it's currently in beta. Like I think this is going to be something we might see at the big CEDIA show.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into our predictions next week, right? But a couple of stories actually that we'll throw up in the show notes. One from The Verge, and then one I think from That's Not Funny. Is we had the one from The Verge was interesting because Sonos is. It reports that Sonos plans to release new speakers with built-in microphones, likely based off of Alexa, Amazon's technology, of course. So the latest tease actually came from that privacy policy that we were alluding to before, and not really a subtle hint here from the privacy policy. I'm quoting for a second. It says, quote, "Voice control works by your voice-enabled Sonos product, quote, listening, end quote, for a specific wake word. Please note that not all Sonos products are voice-enabled." So their new privacy policy very clearly states it. And, if you go on to read the That's Not Funny story that we're going to link to, it'll become clear to you. You put those stories side by side, and really it appears to be the last remaining question is, will this integration with Alexa be a purely software-based type of thing? Like you'll still have to have your Echo Dot, and those two will just integrate software-wise. Or I think potentially the more likely thing is that it'll be both that as well as Sonos potentially coming out with some new speakers that have the Alexa platform built right into it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel is going to happen. Maybe Sonos will have their own piece, but I definitely think that it totally makes sense for them to just kind of have direct integration with the Amazon Echo. I mean, it would. Don't get me wrong. We haven't seen Sonos product in so long, If they come out with something like this that has the Amazon, like an Echo Dot basically built into the top of a Play One, that would be great. Like that's awesome. So I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens at CEDIA, because I think this is kind of the thing. We've been talking about these booth sizes, and with Amazon, they have a huge presence there at CEDIA this year, and this could be why. There could be a couple of other products that kind of roll out with Amazon Alexa integration. You know what I'm thinking through this entire story is that with Sonos getting Alexa and all these other products integrating with Alexa, I'm going to be doing a lot of editing.
I thought that's where you were going. I was like, I think I know where he's going with this. That's funny.
Yep.
That's funny. There was a lot of A words there. So to spare you any additional editing, we'll move on. I think enough said about that. We'll be excited to see what happens at CEDIA. Speaking of companies that haven't moved with a lot of new product lately that we'd love to see more from, Nest appears to be heading down market this fall. And this is reported. I'm reading here from That's Not Funny, but he cites a gentleman named Evan Blass, who's with VentureBeat. Looks like he got the original scoop on this, and it looks like a more simplistic, less refined, quote, thermostat is on the docket here. There's some pictures floating around of this. You can go check out. Pretty big shift in the, it's still got, of course, that circular shape and all of that, but, white and I think plastics instead of, your metal and glass, and definitely a very, very different look. It looks pretty neat, I think, actually, and I'm seeing some reports that they may try to hit $100 price point and are potentially looking this fall. So we'll be very interested to see if they're able to come out with that.
Yeah, I think it's shockingly different as far as looks go, and if they can meet that price point, they're going to get a lot of business out of it.
It's a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. I think this story actually purports that there may be a partnership with ADT as well. So this could be, being sold by ADT companies out there, which would of course help their distribution. I agree with you. I think it's a pretty cool looking product if these pictures are accurate, and again, if they hit that $100 price point, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I wonder what the integrations will. I mean, Nest is integrated with everything in the past, or tried to integrate with everything in the past. I don't think you're going to get me away from the Ecobee platform because of HomeKit integration. But it will be interesting to see what happens with Nest and HomeKit moving forward. It would be really, really cool to see them do something with HomeKit. I think that'd be really a killer feature for that line.
Yeah. Yep. Jumping here to the next one. So sort of in that similar DIY vein, August, a company that does smart locks, of course, and has been at CEDIA last, I think, at least couple of years. So hoping to see them there as well this year. Looks like they may be coming out with a down market solution as well. And we're giving That's Not Funny a lot of, this is becoming the That's Not Funny
he breaks
episode.
So much. I don't even know how he does it.
He does a great job.
It's ridiculous.
He does a really great job. He says he's got some tipster provided imagery here, so you can click through our show notes and go check this out. It looks like they're pushing as well for this fall to have a down market solution, and presumably both of these companies are eyeing the holiday season with these products. So we'll be really interested to see what they're able to do. One of the things I thought was cool about this story is that it looks like they may include Z-Wave. Right now it's a Bluetooth product, so Z-Wave would of course really help their interoperability with a lot of the DIYers and not even just the DIYers. It just Z-Wave has a huge
security
footprint.
Systems and everything. Yeah,
security systems. So having that technology built in, I think, would be a big win for August. So be really cool to see what they come out with.
Yeah, no, I will be stopping by the August booth. I swung by last year, talked to him a little bit, but this one actually looks a little bit better to me. I've never been a big fan of the big giant August thing that sticks over.
Yeah, it's bulky.
Yeah, but this one looks a lot better. So I can't wait to see it. I hope we get to see it at CEDIA this year. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, speaking of CEDIA, we've alluded to it a couple of times. A couple of quick CEDIA stories we want to touch on here. But before we do that, we want to mention our Home Tech Happy Hour that we're doing. We've had some really great responses to that, and it looks like it's going to be a really nice turnout, Seth.
Yeah, so people are still signing up, and I don't want to close down the registration, but I think sometime between this week and next week, I'm going to have to. And then I'm going to have to figure out after I've got a pretty good count, I think, of people who are signing up for it. I'm going to have to figure out where we're going to go, someplace nearby. I just want to be quick, like a quick, nice get together before the heavy drinking starts later on at some of the major parties.
That's right.
But yeah, I just want to get together, have a chat, shake some hands, and grab a couple of drinks, and then let everybody get on to their crazy nights that they have at CEDIA, or go home and get some rest, and so you can study for those next classes.
Do the responsible thing.
Whatever your thing is. Definitely. So HomeTech.fm. If you go there, look up at the top. There's a little bar at the top that says HomeTech Happy Hour. Click on that, and that'll bring you to the form, and you can fill that out. Let us know what day works best for you. It looks like, I want to say, looked like Friday was looking better. I'll have to go back and look. I think it might end up being on Friday, but if Thursday does work better for you, let us know. Most people check off Thursday and Friday, so it doesn't matter. But I'm thinking, like, real quick after the show ends, we'll meet over to something nearby, grab a few drinks, and then head on out after that and have some fun.
Absolutely. Well, like we said, speaking of CEDIA, wanted to touch on Keynote this year, second year in a row. Somebody from Amazon will be giving the keynote, and I think this is really interesting given all the conversations we've been having around GAFA and the Bruno was right meme that appears to be bubbling to the surface for this year's CEDIA. Really, really, really interesting. Sarah Zentz is the general manager of the smart home services business. So I'm actually really fascinated to hear this keynote. I'm really going to try to make it. I don't know for sure if I'll be able to, but last year it was Charlie Kindle, who's the head of Alexa. And this year it's somebody in the smart home services, which has been a really big story. I've done a couple of blog posts for this in the in CE Pro, I think was the latest one I did, analyzing this move by Amazon to get into smart home services. And it's something that they're doing with their own employees. When you go to the Amazon Home Services page, you can click on a bunch of these other services like painting and landscaping and even TV hanging and home theater. A lot of these other services are, pretty much all of them, to my knowledge, are done through third-party companies, right? But you click on the smart home services, which is given very prominent billing on that page, and it takes you to a page that looks totally different than all of the other ones. And the fact that Amazon is bringing this in-house and really taking ownership of it, I think is absolutely fascinating. So I would love to hear what goes on at this keynote. I think it'll be a really interesting glimpse into what Amazon is thinking about when it comes to smart home service.
Yep, and also besides the keynotes, Amazon's offering some manufacturing training classes that if you didn't spend too much time out, these are at 4 p.m., so it really doesn't matter. You can party after our party and still make it to these.
Even Chris Gamble will be able to make it to those.
Yeah, so there's three of them: growing your business with Alexa, designing Alexa today, and integrating Alexa far-field capabilities into your product with Intel and AVS, which I think is Amazon Voice Services, if I'm not mistaken. But those three classes are there and part of CEDIA. So and they're free. Those are things that anybody who is interested in those, who is registered and can go to CEDIA, you can just click on those as you're kind of going through your checkout process, and you can attend those classes. Which I think designing with Alexa today, that one appeals to me a little bit. I think I might try and make that one.
Very cool. Well, I hope you can and report back. I'd be curious to know what's discussed there. Moving on to our next CEDIA-related story here, Eero, a company. Seth, I was trying to remember if it was last year or the year before. We always kind of come away from CEDIA with an overall theme. And what is that one or two big takeaways? And I know in years past we've talked about this idea of meeting in the middle, right? There was this big big concern by a lot of integrators about having to head down market and meet these companies at the DIY end of the spectrum and see what that means for the industry. And I think there's still a lot of that going on, and it's a very valid conversation and something to be thinking about. But I also think if you're not paying attention, it's easy to miss companies sort of coming up to meet the professional installer, and this story is just one example of it. So Eero has its Eero Pro program. That was, I think, last year is when we heard about that first. The story that broke recently is they now have I I guess, PoE, and that's a new thing. I didn't realize that they didn't have that before, but they do now. So PoE, and then remote network management. So RSM, remote systems management, is the term, of course, that we typically use here, but they've come out with a platform of their own to provide home technology professionals with a little bit of remote support capabilities, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was hearing about this. Someone I heard talking on another podcast was talking about some PoE Pro Eros that he was messing around with. And, because this guy that I was listening to does big, large installs and like quick installs, like show installs where you have to go in one day, set everything up, and then break it down and walk away. And I'm thinking, what the heck is he talking about? And I went over to Eero Pro and I saw the Pro thing. And now this makes sense. Like now the conversation where he was talking about they had PoE versions makes sense. So this is perfect. This is definitely meeting back in the middle. Eero has been, I don't know, they've been a kind of a DIY product, but they've also been sold through distribution as well into the Cydia channel. So I think that this company in particular recognizes that the Cydia channel exists and the installers exist and wants to work with them. And I think that making this little PoE powered Eero definitely is a step in the right direction. I hope that we see more things along those lines, especially out of some of the other DIY type companies, Nest, Cam, in the future.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be to the benefit of everyone. I truly do believe that there are very viable business models to be made, to be successful in the new reality that is our market. We've talked about it a number of times before, and I'm not going to get up on the soapbox and start talking about the GAFA, the whole, rehashing the whole GAFA conversation. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it benefits everybody if these companies can look to the professional market and figure out ways that we can actually work together and provide value-added services. So Eero's a great example of that. I like what they're doing. Ring, you're starting to see more of. Nest has their Pro division. We've had Gene Lanoy on, who heads up that division. It seemed like a guy who really gets it. So a lot of companies are looking at the channel. Amazon is there, and you obviously have to wonder what their intentions are overall as it pertains to the quote-unquote traditional Cydia integrator. But there's a lot of opportunities to work together, and it's to the benefit of our industry and these products as well. Eero, I think, will benefit from a better user experience, and I think the end user, will benefit just from a more seamless experience as well. So interesting to see how this is all shaking out, and I think it'll be another prominent theme of this year's Cydia.
Yeah, I want to read one little line from the story here. PoE has been the number one request from dealers. The second biggest request is remote network monitoring, which will also be demonstrated at Cydia. That's pretty cool. Like that, we definitely like to have the ability as integrators to go in and fix problems without having to roll a truck. And it's interesting to see Eero kind of jump on that bandwagon along with some of the, like, I can think of like Luxel and maybe what's the other one? Pack Edge. Control4 had Pack Edge. Like they've done some kind of like basic remote monitoring. We've got Oversee from SnapAV, and now joining them is Eero. So I'm glad to see that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, with that, Seth, why don't we tee up our conversation once again? We had Jack MacDougall on from PixelGen, and great conversation about a lot of the challenges in this brewing sort of format war that's going on with HDR. But we didn't just talk about HDR. We really talked about the video landscape as a whole, talked a little bit about PixelGen and what his company does, which is an interesting product, and would definitely encourage you, if you're having issues with passing high bandwidth video signals, go give him a look. He's clearly a guy who knows what he's talking about, is passionate about this stuff, and one can only assume that reflects in their product. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into our interview with Jack MacDougall. Hey, Jack, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we look forward to jumping in and talking about all of those fun things like HDR and HDMI and 4K and a lot of the complexities surrounding this major evolution that we're going through right now with video. But before we do that, why don't you give our listeners just a little bit of a personal introduction and maybe talk about some of your personal background as well?
Yeah, no problem. So we're based out of Burlington, Ontario, Canada. I am an engineer first, so I'll apologize in advance. What we're really doing here is looking at. I've been working in the Pro AV sector for about 15 years now. I actually started specializing in high-speed signal recovery methods for video broadcast market. That was something where I gained this really strange obsession with getting HDMI over any type of what we call alt-PHY, so a VGA cable or coax cable and all these different weird things. I just developed this inherent knowledge of HDMI, and I've just kind of never really let go of it. So it kind of has carried on from its inception back in 07, 08, all the way up till now. So really from the chip level all the way to now the getting into some really exciting things. I've kind of learned all the way along. So that's a little bit of my background, and that's about it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I know that we've talked about your product on the show before. I think Seth stopped by at last year's CEDIA and had a chat with you and learned about some of the stuff that PixelGen has going on. But obviously, for the benefit of listeners out there who haven't had an opportunity really to hear about PixelGen or learn what it is that you guys do, give us the elevator pitch. What is PixelGen Design all about?
Great. Yeah. So we're an electronics manufacturer of uncompressed 4K distribution equipment. So we are in a unique position. So the foundation of PixelGen is comprised of two key components. So overall, we want to deliver truly uncompressed high-speed signal connectivity methods first and foremost to zones where there should be no compromise, thus no compression. That's really what we tell our vendors and all enthusiasts we've worked with, really kind of bringing to the surface of what it is that we do. We do deliver these signals reliably over copper with what we feel is the most interoperable and robust solutions in the market today. So that's pretty much a top-down of what we believe in as our brand. But to go a step further, we do engineer everything in Canada, so everything is from the ground up. We're not we don't work with third-party OEMs or ODMs, which does make my kids pretty happy that they can see me a lot more, and I'm not over in China half the time. So that's quite nice. Our initial products do concentrate on more of the in-zone long-reach extenders, and that's where Pixel Drive comes into play, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. So really what we're doing is starting with the extenders and then moving into more distribution products, so things to switch high-speed signals and 18 gig signals that can hopefully complement one another, Pixel Drive and these switching products down the road.
Very cool, very cool. And so when we talked about PixelGen at CEDIA, it's a tiny little device. If you ever get in trouble and you can't get 4K for some reason on your projector or TV, and you've got a long HDMI run, this is the device to use. You just pop this in, it will correct the signal and fix it for you. And tiny, like really small little device. This thing is probably, it's smaller than my iPhone from what I remember. I thought it was one of the most impressive things I saw at CEDIA, just because I know that I've been in the situation where I turn on a big system and we flip over to an HD signal, and all of a sudden there's no picture.
Right. Yeah.
And not a good time.
Exactly. And, I'll thank you for coining the phrase a 4K fixer, which I've used actually quite a bit. Oh. So the check's in the mail.
Awesome.
Yeah, it has been something that's actually really opened my eyes as to how big this problem would actually hit the industry. I had predicted at one point that it certainly would have a convergence of these high-speed signals hitting the real world and extension methods just kind of dropping like flies. But all the hard work we put into perfecting this product, even since CEDIA, I'll be quite honest with you. You find any issues out there in the field, we adapt, we fix. We've come up with something that's very, very special and unique. Can cater to that, retrofitted in-wall buried cable to something that, even to the new construction where you have a premeditated cable that we can provide. We try to provide everything in that, up to say 20 meter reach, which I feel is a pretty dominant percentage of long reach extension out there. So that's really where we wanted to kind of rest our head on at night, is to say that we're the ones that can really deliver the uncompressed image up to that 20 meter, threshold, which we're pretty happy about.
And uncompressed. Okay, so we're definitely going to get into video tonight, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So no need to apologize for being an engineer, because that's really when we were talking about some of these things the last couple of weeks, we were last couple of weeks, last couple of months, we've been saying, every time, we need to get somebody that knows about this video stuff on the show. And you're the guy that comes to mind every time. And I think I've asked you questions on Twitter about actually compression. This is maybe a good place to start. But in general, let's talk a little bit about HDMI and some of the common problems that you see, like what HDMI is, what it was made for, and what common problems do you see with HDMI in general?
Sure. I think the response to that, I think that is key here is the beginnings of our company. So about 2 years ago, we had this idea that integrators and installers all over the place seemed to be figuring things out on their own, and they didn't have much education to the point to understand where the problems lied and how to fix them. They were really driven by their end dealers or often distribution, to the point where I feel like there was a trickle down effect from inferior technology. These 18 gig bit rates are nothing to really, you don't want to challenge these. We call it the beast because it is a very high speed signal used in professional industries, which are kind of guard banded by these very stringent standards bodies like SMPTE and things like that. So really getting back to the origins of PixelGen, we wanted to try to fix that by offering a product that could actually fix the problem altogether, very plug and play. But also provide information and education behind what's actually going on to kind of empower the dealer to understand what they're fixing and feel good about it. But second to that, I mean, HDR has always been on the horizon. I think that's the big part of the conversation is we saw that, maybe a year to 2 years away back in 2015, we saw the possibility that this could kind of get to a point or come to a head and things would just start going haywire. So hopefully I can help demystify, what HDR standards represent what data rates and which are the real kind of key killers, to be honest with you. But getting into, we call it max 4K. People call it full 4K. We don't like that because it kind of conflicts with the old full HD, which was kind of misleading also. But with max 4K, what we're trying to do is really kind of separate ourselves from a lot of those compression techniques out there. And I don't want to be a mudslinger, and I don't want to say that, that solution is bad, because all these CADX solutions out there, they're incredible. They do extraordinary reaches. They give you all these peripheral connectivity solutions, your RS-232s and USBs and PoE and all these great things that are really convenient. But there has to be kind of a point where someone shines a light at each product to say, what is it truly? And I feel like a lot of CADX extension technologies, for whatever reason, are kind of burying the details that and other industries wouldn't actually be suitable at all. You have to be very upfront to the end user as to what it can and cannot do. Whether or not that's behind, hiding behind an ODM or an OEM overseas and just their knowledge of what the product is, it doesn't really matter. So coming from the manufacturer ourselves, we want to tell everybody that this is a 100% one-for-one uncompressed image that you're receiving. And I think that's where we're really growing as a company. And one thing I wanted to really emphasize, and I think this is a good spot to do it, is talking about CADX extension in general. And, you look at the category cabling of choice extension method. I don't really want to name names, but there's, AV over IP technology, and then there's ones that can add all these other peripherals. The one that we're talking about with that example, you're looking at something that has a 9 gigabit ceiling, and of course we go up to 18 gigabits. As soon as you go over that 9 gig, it actually shoehorns all that additive bandwidth under its own allowable ceiling of bandwidth capacity. Now that's not something they really broadcast at a high level. It's kind of buried in information, and I'd prefer it to be a little bit more upfront. But as soon as you tip over that 9 gig, which is just your, the lowest form of 4K, like the standard, like the SDR, standard dynamic range, that's allowable and that's fine, and you're fine. But now you're looking at going into HDR and Dolby Vision and 444, and there will be kind of a compression technique that's always applied. So we want to make sure that we label those guys properly, but also stand up for what we've worked so hard for as well.
Sure. Real quick, I want to make sure I heard it correctly. Did you say you guys call HDMI the beast?
Yes. Yeah. We coined that phrase. Yeah. Well, we actually did a white paper called Corralling the Beast. And that was the whole idea, is corralling the 18G beast. just to kind of put some sexy kind of emphasis on what we're trying to do here.
It is a beast. It is a beast. And I think probably a large majority of the people listening right now are nodding their heads in agreement, with that sentiment. I think that's great. I may have to use that. Seth gave you guys the 4K fixer, and we may take the beast and call it a fair trade.
Yeah, it sounds like the Isaiah Thomas trade. It's 1 for 1, right?
That's right. But let's okay. So you threw a bunch of things out there, and all of this stuff is pertinent, and we're going to dive into some of these and peel back the layers sort of one at a time. But I want to step back for just a second and lay a little bit of groundwork. So, and forgive me because I forget the term that you guys use. A lot of people say full 4K, and you can correct me and remind me what that term was. But talk about what that is, because a lot you get these long strings, right, where people talk about 4K HDR 444. And, most people know what 4K is, and I'd say probably most people know what HDR is, but then you get into that 444, and maybe you can help us unpack that a little bit, understand what those numbers actually mean, and put it in a sort of a practical sense, right? Like, what is the bandwidth impact of that last little piece of the equation?
Okay, I can actually get this down to a level that I feel like there's not enough people talking about it this way. Really what it is, if you can imagine the bit rate is analogous to a single stream of data. Now, a single stream of data is representative of the entire active and blanking regions of a screen. So if you look at one image on a screen and all the blanking information, which I'm sure a lot of your audience are aware of, all of this information is one giant stream of video and audio in the HDMI's point of view. So what you're looking at is it's just this one very simple formula that dictates what the bandwidth or bit rate. I talk in bit rate because it really is a megabits per second, gigabits per second perspective, and I consider that truly a bit rate. So if we just take a very easy example, they're all just multipliers in a simple, this times this times this times this equals this. You get to understand exactly where these bit rates come from and how the relationship between the data rates and the formats coexist. So really, there's 4 key variables in the calculation. So there's resolution. So obviously, if it's 4K or HD or 720p, frame rate. So if it's 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. The bit depth, 8-bit video, 10-bit video, or 12-bit video for how many divides of video or colors are in your video. And also subchroma sampling, which is something that I'll do my very best to explain. Without graphical aid, it's going to be next to impossible, but I'll give it my best shot in a sec. Out of those 4 variables, you just multiply them together, and you end up with the exact, to the decimal bit rate that you need. So I'll give you one quick example. If you take a standard dynamic range signal working at 4K 60 frame, 8-bit 420, which I'm sure everybody's heard about, that equates to an 8.91 gigabit per second aggregate bandwidth. All right. So when I say aggregate, inside an HDMI cable, there's 3 twisted pairs that are devoted for video, audio and video, I keep saying, but essentially for video. And there's one for red, one for green, and one for blue. And if you take any one of those pairs, you just multiply by 3. So this calculation gives you the 1 pair bit rate, and then you just multiply that by 3, and you get your total bandwidth. So if you take a 4K 60, you're basically taking an 8-bit 420. You just multiply the entire bit length of that video on one screen. So an example of a red channel on we call it the TMDS2 channel, you take the total pixels, active and the blanking region. You multiply by the frame rate, which be 30 or 60. You multiply that by the bits per pixel. So you would have 8 bits per pixel, for example. And then there's one other piece that's basically 10 divided by 8, which is nothing more than just like a nerdy encoding method for HDMI, which just, for overhead. And you end up with 2.97 gigabits per second, for example. Now, you just multiply that by 3, and that's where you get your 9 gig. Now, if you were to, say, double the frame rate from 30 frames to 60 frames, that would be a factor of 2 in that multiplier. So you would end up with 6 gig, or just short of that. It's like 5.94 gig. You multiply that by 3, and that gives you your 18 gig. So that's one example, going with like an SDR going up to 8.91. And then at the very high end, there's 2 key formats, the ones that are really the most problematic. So you're looking at the 444 signal. So you would have a 4K 60 resolution. You'd have an 8-bit signal, with full 444 subchroma sampling, and that gives you the highest ceiling. But also Dolby Vision, the 12-bit 422 signal, can actually achieve that same 18 gig bandwidth. So it's not just the 444 that everybody's kind of been, attacked by here and there and wondering what is it, and I have to have it in my technology. It's understanding first, out of those factors, what doubles or halves will affect the overall bit rate. So it starts at the very low end at 480p at 270 megabits per second, all the way up to 18 gig, and there's hundreds of data rates in that ascension. So that's kind of where that's all coming from as far as how the bandwidths actually come to be.
Wow.
That was my biggest nerd out of the day, I think.
We may need some backing.
I lost way back there. I was told there would be no math tonight on the show, and I started drinking wine early. And
you're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is admittedly tough to keep up with, right? But I think it perfectly shines a light on why this is so complicated, and why I think there's a lot of room, unfortunately, for manufacturers to play with numbers a little bit and say, perhaps that they do things that, maybe it's not a lie, but it's sort of a half truth, right? And that's a very oversimplified way of stating it. But I think you see a lot of this when you start to look around at different 4K solutions, and there's so many more layers to it than just the number of pixels in your resolution. And I think that's where a lot of it unfortunately gets a little bit muddy. But let's talk for a second about HDR in particular, because I think it's a very exciting technology. Seth and I have talked about it a bunch of times on the show, and there's a lot of hype around 4K, and there has been for quite a while now. And it's a great technology, but the smaller your screen, the less visibly like it impacts your viewing quality. And I think with HDR, it's one of those technologies that even on a smaller screen, it's going to make a significant impact to your viewing experience. Now, on the surface, it would seem like, well, it's HDR, but when you start to peel back the layers again on that, you've got all of these different competing formats. So give our listeners a little bit of an overview of the different formats that are out there, maybe what some of the abbreviations stand for, and what are some of the really key differences on a surface level that at least even an average consumer should be aware of.
Right. So this is one I could definitely bring down to earth a little bit. So what we're looking at is the measurement of nits. All right. So the measurement of how much light can actually be sent from a display within a given area. So think of it as like the sun. So it's very topical. It's like now we can all get back to our sun staring ways. But with the nit information, just to give you an idea of how it compares to ambient light. So you're looking at, between 100 and 200 nits would be kind of a SDR. So back in the, HDMI HD days, that's kind of the nit rating that you would get as far as brightness. With HDR, you're looking anywhere from 400 to 2000, and 2000 is actually uncommon right now. It seems to be maxed out around 1000, but the 2000s are coming, and Dolby Vision does actually claim as high as 4000 and 10,000 by spec. But ambient brightness, so if you take a full sunshiny day, bright blue sky, and you were to kind of look at the brightness of what's coming down at you, it's around 10,000 nits. So the whole idea of HDR is to give you that emulation of ambient light, and it's actually impressive. I mean, I was at one Sony demo where they actually showed some Las Vegas neon lights on one of the reference series models, and it gave you that real sensation of you don't want to stare at it for too long. You kind of want to look away. So I don't know what was going on in the back. It was like a waterfall cooling it down or whatnot, but it's just whatever it was incredible, and it really kind of changed my whole view on how HDR is actually kind of, in a way, leapfrog 4K. 4K has become, the old 1080p. Everyone's kind of done talking about 1080p, and everyone knows it's 4K. It's readily available, but HDR is the new thing. So I have some thoughts on it overall. First of all, it's very hard to compare all these different standards that I'm going to try to dive into a little bit further, because to be honest with you, I don't have all of these different panels sitting in front of me, and it's very hard to do an apples to apples when a lot of these demos you see at shows are obviously self-serving for good reason. They want to kind of broadcast their best shot at their own HDR format. So I have a hard time kind of truly believing in it until I see someone who's kind of unbiased. But the honest truth is HDR10, it's great, and Dolby Vision, it's great. Like, I really can't say anything bad about either. I think they're both fantastic. But I do think it's going to be hard for the common consumer to start, trying to challenge each of the technologies themselves. It becomes a very tough thing where they're just kind of ramming a lot of marketing down their throats. And the truth is, I think they're all fantastic. I mean, it comes down to all these classic clashes between like Blu-ray, HD DVD, and Beta VHS. My father actually still goes to garage sales and buys Beta and fixes them for some strange reason. So the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So what we'll do here is tell me if I'm going a little too crazy here, but I'm going to look at 4 key.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. You're still awake, which is, I think, the key to the whole thing. I think what we want to look at are 4 key, very readily available HDR formats. And I'm going to start with HDR10 because they were obviously first to the game. We're going to look at HDR10, Dolby Vision, HDR10 Plus, and hybrid long gamma, so HLG. So we'll start with HDR10. So they were obviously first to the game, and I think that's an important piece of conversation. Everything's mastered to 10 bits in their color depth. Okay, so I'll say, quote unquote, this is less color than Dolby Vision, but we're talking about 1 billion colors that you can get with HDR10. So that's quite a few colors. 1,000 nits is its highest level of luminance that it can project. And from a manufacturing point of view, and coming from my point of view, it is an open standard, so it's very easy to implement. And the content creators can use this without any licensing fees. So it's set up very nicely from a manufacturing side, but also for the end user. Very common, it seems to be pretty much popping up everywhere. That being said, I want to dive into Dolby Vision a little bit. So what you're really getting there is 2 key pieces, well, actually 3, is that you're mastering the video in 12-bit color depth. Now that is the difference between 1 billion colors and 64 billion colors. You're getting up to 10,000 nits, so again, something that's analogous to the brightness of outside, which is pretty incredible. So they're saying if you put a TV outside right next to it, you would essentially be seeing the same thing. But the current target is probably around 4,000 or 5,000 nits is like the peak, and it seems to change. Like with every blog I see, people are claiming different things. But not many TVs at the moment can go above 1,000. But one of the biggest claims to fame here with Dolby Vision is that it has this really cool frame-by-frame metadata that provides essentially it's scene by scene appropriate HDR levels, and that's dynamic. That's something that's pretty special because there's certain dark scenes that you would want to use the darkness, and certain high scenes you want to use the brightness. And HDR10 just basically statically sets it when the movie starts. So that's the big advantage there. From a manufacturing point of view, there is this what's called a system on a chip certification process, and there's more of this. There's a lot less content that's out there right now, but I wouldn't just take the easy path out and say that they're going to lose because they just don't have enough content. So HDR10 Plus, this is kind of the progression and the response to where we're at right now. So this is created by Samsung and Amazon, and it's up to debate, why this actually came out and the timing of when it came out. But it does deliver that dynamic metadata, that scene-by-scene brightness. So it's kind of a combination of what HDR10 brought to the table in the first place, and a little bit of what Dolby Vision does on that frame-by-frame metadata. So it is a pretty cool technology, and it is a free and open standard with no royalties, just like HDR10. Then you get into this really kind of new one to me, and I actually had to think about this a little bit and do some research and actually kind of listen in on some people that know a lot more about this than I do with hybrid long gamma. So this was created between BBC in the UK and NHK, which is the Japanese national broadcaster. So it is 10 bits, but what it does, it's kind of a cool thing. It combines standard dynamic range and high dynamic range in a single stream of video, really catering to broadcast feeds. And the idea is that if you have an SDR panel or an HDR panel, it'll give you, in that single stream, it'll just adapt and give you what you need on that display. Some people argue that you feel like you may not be getting the best SDR and the best HDR. So I guess that's one kind of con, is that people have been kind of worried about that. And of course, Google has actually adopted that HDR process for their videos. So there's, this crazy, like so many kind of cross-pollinating features and all these different things that no one could really tell you which is best because most people are biased. But what I will say is this, is I believe that Dolby Vision is a clear winner when it comes to specification. It can't be argued that 64 billion colors, the dynamic metadata, and the huge ceiling for brightness on a TV. And number one, and I think the piece that no one is really talking about, is its backwards compatibility, is that you can be backwards compatible with HDR10, HDR10 Plus, and HLG, all theoretically, really. But it has been proven that they can be under that chipset. So I believe that backwards compatibility is king, and that to the end user, they get everything. If you have a Dolby Vision source, you can use it, and it won't scare you off buying a panel based on what HDR it does. If you buy a Dolby Vision HDR panel, you get everything that you would ever need, and let the conversation kind of settle itself. So that's kind of my views on it. But I mean, it's a great debate.
Yeah. So this is exactly where we wanted to go with this is what happens if I go out and buy a 4K TV today, maybe that has HDR10 on it. And then what I get a 4K source, maybe like a Chromecast or, a Philips Blu-ray or an LG Blu-ray or something. What happens to it if I hook a panel into a source that doesn't have one of these strange markings on it that says Dolby Vision or HLG or HDR10 or 10 plus? Like as a consumer, if I was approaching this, what should I worry about here? Should I just kind of look for Dolby Vision, like you said, and just kind of like, let's go for that because that'll, like you said, that'll cover everything just in case? Or I mean, how is this going to work for consumers to get into this product? Because I think HDR really, I mean, more so than 4K, HDR is an actual selling point for a TV panel or for a projector. Like this technology does actually make a difference. I guess more than like 3D did, because 3D is kind of like, was more of a gimmick. I in my opinion, more of a gimmick for HD TVs. They've gotten flatter, they've gotten thinner, they're almost like wallpaper on the wall. And now we have this possibility to do HDR, and we've got all these standards. And I'm just wondering, if I approach this from a consumer and go down to the local big box store and buy a TV, how do I match that up with what I want to play and make sure that I get HDR at the end of the day? Yeah,
I mean, you're looking at especially in the next year coming up, I think it's just going to be this, all-out war of who's going to win. But it's really, I believe that they can be harmonious if they all got together and figure out a way to do it. But the reality is, you're right. It's going to be tough for even someone at a store or a reseller to really be educated to tell you, which is best and which is best for you. Really, what it comes down to is the enthusiasts do your research, and if you believe in what I say, I mean, it would be Dolby Vision because it has that maximum ceiling and you're future-proof for some time. Cough, cough, 8K. But the truth is, it comes down to the lowest common denominator of what your player will provide and what your display can project. And if you truly want to go for that Dolby Vision, you can definitely do that. You would know for sure that both of those were capable. It's branded very obviously with everything that you do, including the content that's coming out. I mean, the discs out there, they put it up front, and you'll be able to see that, and you can see them on Twitter all the time and social media. They'll zoom in on the movie and say, with Dolby Vision, the Despicable Me's, and I think Red is out. It's interesting. Guardians didn't come out because I think that was only on Vudu, and that I guess I don't know if it was that Disney ran out of time or they weren't on time, but I think their goal was to get that out on Blu-ray. But it's always changing. So really, you need to understand the whole ecosystem, the disc to the drive that you're using, the Blu-ray you're using, and what your capabilities of your TV are. So unfortunately, it's just you're going to have to almost on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis kind of keep up to date with who's winning, who's ahead, what the bigger story is. But I'm hoping that everything will kind of settle on one big happy, everyone playing in the same sandbox and everyone's happy.
Right. On I think a couple of shows ago on episode 174, we talked about this particular problem, and it was in an HDR report status of August 2017. Kind of went along with the Apple leaks that were going on at the time, and it's got all the manufacturers of video sources and I guess panel displays, and in some respects, like Samsung's on here, LG's on here, Sony's on here. So it's kind of a mix of manufacturers and what they do. But also has Netflix and Amazon. This chart is kind of, what do we call this? A Venn diagram of the entire field and layout of everything. And it looks like HDR10 and Dolby Vision pretty much cover everything that's out there. I guess not Samsung though. Samsung seems to be HDR10 and HDR10 Plus, which you mentioned before. So I mean, it looks like most everything that you would get would have HDR support in some form or fashion. Is that not right? Like if I have a streaming player, some of these things on here, like Chromecast, they're definitely streaming players. Is that going to matter much? Like, is this something that's done at the software level, or is this all hardware? When they put this together, when Dolby Vision version 2 comes out, am I going to have to update my Apple TV? I guess is where I'm going with this.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, what I should have mentioned up front is that Dolby Vision, there is that system on a chip that is a dedicated piece of hardware, a chip that through the qualification process mandates that you need a certain chip for it. So if you're talking about HDR10, that's something that you'll notice down the road. You could get on a Samsung TV that had HDR10. You could easily, I'm like 99.9% sure that there would be a firmware update that would enable you to have that HDR10 Plus, which could be the dynamic metadata. That's 100%. Now HLG, perhaps that could be the same thing, where they kind of work that in as well and kind of piggyback on the HDR10 success, and everything is kind of harmonious and happy. But Dolby Vision absolutely is a hardware thing, and that's why I think the adoption has been a bit slower, because you're looking at something that costs money to build, and licensing and royalties, and a lot of those CE vendors don't like those sorts of things. They like to kind of get things done lean and open and a little bit more free. But that's just kind of the nature of the business. But I really personally think the quality that you're getting with any technology is fantastic. But Dolby Vision certainly is a hardware-centric thing. I mean, I think really coming into the end of this year, to Black Friday, into next year, is really going to go down as the year of HDR confusion and 8K future temptation, is what I would probably best describe it. It's just a constant, carousel of just always trying to one-up. Everyone's trying to one-up each other and kind of get people to kind of deep dive into you need this. And it could get a little crazy, to be honest with you, because I think HDR has just started to settle in a weird way. It's all there for the user, and you can all enjoy it, but then they have this kind of little, dangly 8K just ringing outside of the whole conversation. And I wonder if that's actually going to hurt the CE industry, because it could make people hold off even longer when we're trying to create kind of a mass market appeal to, say, ultra high definition Blu-ray players. And right now it's still fairly niche-y. It's kind of the corner of the store, right? So that is kind of where my worry lies.
Right. Well, we're running out of our time here. Wanted to zoom out and ask a little bit of a high-level question. You alluded to it a couple of times there in your last couple of answers, and that's 8K. And I always, I admit to being a little bit of a layman when it comes to this stuff, but I roll my eyes a little bit when I see people talking about 8K, because from my perspective, like, why don't we get 4K right first, and then we can start thinking about 8K. But talk about 8K video. How real is that? How soon is that coming? Is that something people should be really thinking seriously about right now, or is this all sort of vaporware?
Right. So the way I look at this is that personally, I believe in enough better quality pixels over more pixels, period. It's where I'm at right now, and I think kind of is a nice segue, because we just talked about it, is 4K HDR formats it's a glorious thing, and the OLEDs that are only going to come down in price is going to, everyone's going to be, diving into this very soon. 8K at the moment, I think the target right now is the 8K 120, and I think that's really being catered for the VR world. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look through that yet, but it is pretty amazing what can be done, but it doesn't give you that true life, immersive experience in like reality. You kind of get over the fact that it feels like you're inside an arcade game in a way. But the way I look at this is I think that's more of a VR play to kind of spearhead the whole technology as a whole. I mean, you definitely don't want to get me started on cabling and 8K, because that's just, I think we'll be on for 3 or 4 more shows. Yeah, but generally speaking, here's my detailed view on it, is that it needs to, the timelines I'm hearing are as early as the beginning of next year that they'll start deploying this technology. It just seems like way too much in such a short amount of time. I mean, from the filming in Hollywood to the media content to how do you play the media content to, the prices of 4K TVs are going to be plummeting already. We're already niche with 4K Blu-ray players and of course connectivity. I mean, the cable spec is yet to exist. So they're expecting a technology to pop out there with no content and panels that are niche to begin with. And I have no idea what they would cost initially, but probably similar to what 4K monitors were in the beginning. It seems a little pie in the sky right now. And I never like to, poo-poo on these great technologies that are coming, but this is one where I feel like the lessons have been learned strong enough to know that maybe it's time to let 4K ride a little bit longer and let the industry kind of get to where it needs to be. I mean, the enthusiasts out there and the dealers, I'm sure, have just been ripping their hair out for how to connect everything properly. And I think we're finally there to make everyone happy. So they'll be happy. But for the end user, I think it's all there for the taking. So 8K, I know that they're broadcasting some things in 8K, and I do know some panels are coming out, but that's pretty much all I've heard. So I would say realistically, you're looking at 1.5 to 2 years is the, minimum time it's going to take to get all this in your living room.
Yeah. And a stable 4K ecosystem is going to serve you a lot better than a buggy 8K one, right?
That's right. I mean, you're basically taking my angst and multiplying by 2.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jack, this has been fascinating. Honestly, I love the conversation and your ability to sort of take these complex concepts and bring them down to earth. So I would look forward potentially to the opportunity to, maybe have you back on here periodically as these technologies start to shake out and coalesce a little bit more. I think it would be great. So we really enjoyed it. If there's anybody listening who wanted to connect with you, maybe learn a little bit more about your company or ask you a follow-up question or two, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, thanks, Jason. And first of all, I would want to say to you guys, thank you so much for, an opportunity to just come out and talk to the end users. It's something I put the whole company behind. I love hearing all this information back from the end user. It's really a nice fit, and I'm happy to come on at any time. I'm very disappointed that you didn't let me to jump into 444 because I was really excited about that. But other than that, I think that'll be its own dedicated program where, people,
I think it's going to have to be. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually had like a puppet show version of it ready and everything.
Oh, well,
that's right.
I was writing down all the letter things that we used, and I was going to try and play bingo with this later.
Yeah.
And I stopped around 17 of them. So there's a lot going on. And I mean, 422, which I guess you said was part of Dolby Vision, I had never even heard of. So
yep.
I think we're going to have one of those 444, 420, 422 shows soon.
It's all easy. Like, part of me wants to wedge it in there and break all the rules, but I won't. But I'll just say this: anyone who wants to contact me, you can actually reach out directly to me because I'm very open with trying to solve problems out there and hopefully get you interested in our product lines as well. So first of all, go to the website PixelGenDesign.com. That's just the word pixel, GEN design.com. Openly on Twitter, I'm at PixelGen Jack. So just PixelGen Jack after the handle there. Any issues you have, I'd love to solve those problems in the open. So maybe people in the future won't have those problems. We all work together. You can also email us at info@pixelgendesign.com. And obviously for our product line, it's my shameless plug, but we do have dealer pricing available for anyone out there that's experiencing issues with pre-existing cables falling short or just general HDMI issues that we can maybe help out with. So we do have dealer pricing available. We can help anybody out with that. And again, thank you so much, guys. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. We really appreciate it. And for anybody listening, if you want to access any of the follow-up sort of notes or anything from this conversation, we'll be at HomeTech.fm/176. So thanks again, Jack. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to connecting with you again very soon.
No problem. All the best, guys.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.